Hey, everybody, and welcome back to another breathtaking episode of the best darn show on the internet, the Over Sharon Show. Today, we are joined by a guest. We haven't had a guest in a few weeks, and I'm very excited with our returning guest. But before we get into all that stuff, I'm going to read today's quote. And today's quote was actually sent to us by our guest. So here we go. Today's quote: sensation tells you that something exists. Thinking tells you what it is. Feeling tells you whether it is agreeable or not. And intuition tells you when it comes and where it is going. And that's by Carl Gustav Jung.
Jung.
Jung. Carl Jung.
Carl Jung.
Yeah. I found a little
Very
picture of
nice.
him like that with a pipe. See, he's got a pipe.
Yeah,
That's why I used that picture.
very nice. And I will pull a card while Joe gives us just a little bit of a, reason why he liked that quote.
I just picked that quote because it's pretty much lays the foundation to what we were going to talk about today. So I'll be expanding pretty much on basically the quote Brandon just read. So
Fantastic.
Sweet.
Sounds good, Herr
Sounds
Doctor, in my
yeah.
best German.
Yeah, Joe's in Germany allegedly. Don't tell anybody though. I mean, he does live there. So.
Queen of Wands, you guys.
Here I'm gonna pin you so everyone can see it. There you go. Queen of Wands. I like that cat. It's like a magic black cat. I love it.
Oh, yes, your cat. Your cat found its way into the picture, Brandon.
Yes,
One
I
of your
should
cats.
start sharing pictures of my cat on the show weekly. Like, this is Snickers today because I got some good ones. I put them in the chat, but of Snickers in the sun. So like black people don't realize this, but black cats are actually brown. They're not really black, and so in
Yeah,
the
they're
sun,
like a
yeah,
dark brown, huh?
yeah, and it even looked like almost golden or orange. It was,
Yeah, in the sun. I saw
yeah.
the pictures you sent.
Speaking of the sun, look at me.
Yay.
That's pretty funny.
Dude. Oh, good. I was gonna say I'd be so annoyed if the sun were in my face like that.
Yeah, no, I'm actually gonna while you guys talk. I'm just gonna adjust the light. But
Yeah. I was gonna say I notice there's a beautiful sunflowers throughout this, and there's some lion kind of imagery in there. Sunflowers. All sun, right? Sunflowers, lions represent the sun.
fire.
There's golden energy, and then of course fire because of the wands and because of the sun. So yeah, this card is about action,
Yeah, it's a
right?
great card because it symbolizes. I mean, wands are fire, so they symbolize action and magic and will and doing things and stuff like that. And then you think of that as like a masculine energy, right? But then you have the queen, so it's the feminine side of the masculine. And since there's really four court cards, you could break it up really into four. But the queen is like the master of the feminine. When then you have the page, which is like I mean, you could say
Like
master
the
or like the newbie or beginner,
or
if you
the
want to look at it
princess.
that way. Yeah, the princess, exactly, depending on the deck that you're in. So, in regards to the show we're going to do today, I think it is interesting because if you look at this power of, or what, we look at what the wand represents, the fire and the creativity, what we're looking into is psychology. And I think that's more of like a feminine way to look at stuff because a masculine way would be all like action, right? Going and doing it. But this is kind of like a feminine look at a masculine thing. So it's like that take. So it's like taking it maybe like she's seated, taking a sit down or a step back and looking at action. And another reason I think it ties in is because if you're going to take any kind of action, you take it in a certain way based on your personality type. I guess it could be argued, right? So
Yeah.
we're going to be focusing on all that stuff today. So I'm excited.
Yeah. Judging and perceiving, those are some of the terminologies you hear in these circles. So this topic is what is called in the circles, it's called MBTI, and that's short for Myers-Briggs. I don't remember the rest. I should be prepared. Brandon, do you remember what it stands for?
No.
Or anyone else?
Joe, do you know what it stands for?
Myers-Briggs test, the I, that's a good question. I think it's indicator, but I'm not 100%. Don't quote me
Oh,
on that.
yeah. Here, I'll look it up.
I think it's like type indicator or something like that.
Yeah, that sounds right.
Yes, Myers-Briggs Type Indicator.
Okay.
Sorry about my
No problem.
lack of preparation in that regard. So that's what it stands for. And the funny part is when I looked up why is it called that, I found that it was somebody named Myers. They say that it's Myers and Briggs, but when I looked, I'm like, there's only one of those names in there. So I was confused as to why they called it Myers-Briggs myself. Joe,
Yeah,
any thoughts?
I'm not really too versed in the actual Myers-Briggs test thing. It was pretty much from Jung wrote what was it, personality types back in the 1920s, and then later, I don't know, a couple decades later. Also, don't quote me on that. I don't know the exact timeline, but yeah, Isabel Myers, and I want to say it was like a mother-daughter team, like of psychologists. I'm not. Also, don't quote me on that, but I'm pretty sure that's what I recall hearing. And basically, all of the MBTI is just a test. It was a test that was they came up with, Myers and Briggs came up with back in the day, to try to see if they could test to figure out the personality types that Jung talked about in his book a decade or so prior. So, or longer, I don't know. But yeah.
I just found a website that says it began with Catherine Cook Briggs and her daughter Isabel Briggs Myers in the U.S. in the early mid 20th century. So yes, it was mother-daughter, and one's Briggs and the other one is Briggs Myers. So that makes sense now. At first, I saw only the Briggs, and I was confused when I read other things. I don't know why it didn't mention the daughter's name as Briggs Myers. So why it's Myers-Briggs, I don't know, because
not Briggs Myers, yeah.
They took her daughter's name first. But yeah. So the reason we wanted to talk about this topic is it's kind of a relevant topic to the stuff that Brendan and I talk about when you're working on yourself and you want to, raise your consciousness, so to speak. There are certain things you can look at, and when you go within and you want to learn about yourself and improve yourself. So when you look at certain personality tests and the results of those, they can be helpful to you. Well, I have been looking into this, and I was talking to Joe, who had got started like really going down this deep rabbit hole of like wanting to know as much as he possibly could about the subject. And he was telling me, like, from what he's looked into, this is one of the best, if not the best, indicator for knowing yourself and like knowing your personality and improving upon it. So that's why we wanted to have him on, and maybe he can just give us a little snippet of why he likes it so much.
Oh, because I've applied it to myself as well as people I've known, as well as acquaintances, I guess you could say. And when you actually figure out what their type is, you kind of understand how their mind works. You understand how they perceive the reality. You understand how they make decisions. You pretty much got, I would say, about 80% of their number just by understanding what cognitive functions they're using and what order they're using it, which would determine the personality type. So by knowing the personality type, there's so many applications. Like I always try to look for some stuff that I can use. What is applicable, and
Yeah.
I found this to be very applicable. There's many, many ways you can use this. I personally just find it fascinating, to be honest. But I've noticed that it's hard for me sometimes to have compassion for people, but understanding from an understanding point of view, and I've been using this model to try to understand people. I found it very useful, very helpful. I find myself the more I get into this to be a little more compassionate, and
I love that.
just because of that alone this is pretty cool, because yeah, that's part of spiritual growth. Is like Ram Dass's guru always said, you got to learn to love everybody, tell no lies, and love everybody,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah,
It's
love everyone and tell the truth.
that fucking simple, but it's not so easy to love everybody all the time. I mean, there's many ways, 1,000 paths to God, so to speak, but me being, actually all three of us technically are the intellectual temperament. So our path is generally going to be through understanding, through the mind, through intellectualization. So
Absolutely.
Yeah, I've kind of fell in love with this model. I've been, looking into it off and on for many years now, and really hardcore since the last Over Sharon episode I did, because I was telling Sharon that, like, I think all these tests suck. I found a couple good tests. You guys even recommended it on the last one, and then it kind of embarrassed me because it was giving people like fucked up results. So I'm like, okay, those tests suck too. So I was telling Sharon, I'm like, I gotta figure out how to make a test that is more accurate. And Sharon's like, go for it. So I'm like, challenge accepted. So I started going into it to try to figure out the psychometrics, how these tests work, what they're measuring. And ultimately, it didn't take me long to conclude that it's not so much the test in most cases. Yeah, there's some shitty made test out there, but it's not even the test, it's operator error. Like, there's no test that's going to be that accurate. Simply because we're not answering
Subjective.
truthfully. Yeah, objectively. Yeah,
Yeah,
we're not.
yeah.
Yeah,
The human
It's
so
error
very
component.
subjective, right?
yeah,
You answer the way you think you're supposed to answer.
Yeah.
And it's funny because this morning I was taking a test that Joe told me about, and I had taken it before. So I was just going to take it in because it changed some of the questions. And so I was like going to do it again. So I did it again, and I still got the wrong one. And
yes.
it is allegedly it's my subconscious. But I only know that because of the many times I've taken tests, and also because of Joe's help. He has helped me really narrow down and hone down what my type really is. So, but I wanted to just, before we get into it, I wanted to give a little bit of a preface, um, and just talk about how, like, we view this topic, and how we've talked about the zodiac and things like that. We, again, just to reiterate, we see this kind of as a roadmap to self-knowledge, and like being a better person, and not as an excuse for bad behavior, because you know like Joe was saying, it should be a tool for compassion, tool to help you be compassionate, not only to others but also to yourself. Because once you identify the true type, your true type, you can say, well, you know what, that's no wonder, that's just a function of my personality, and I can be okay with myself being that way, not condone it, because in the sense of, like, I'm not going to just be like, well, that's just how I am, but to say, I know that I can do better, I can work on that, and I can improve upon my ability or my ways of, whether it's like talking to people or responding or whatever, right? So yeah, I just wanted to give that little preface
Well,
before
I'd
we
love
jump
to
in.
add to that because I think that's really big. That is huge because what I see a lot with astrology I see it a little bit with the 16 personality types, but most of the people that I know that are into it are really into like self-healing and stuff. So I don't see it as much, but a lot of people are into astrology. A lot of people talk about it, and there's certain tendencies that certain sun signs have. And I do see people like, oh, I can't help it. I'm a this, I'm a that, like I'm a Cancer. That's what I am, right? So I could be like, oh, it's not my fault. I'm moody. I'm a Cancer. You just got to deal with it. Whereas I feel like those tendencies that we have, those are the challenges that we have in this life, this incarnation, whatever it is. Those are the direct challenges for us to overcome. And Sharon and I have said this before, because our personality types, she basically has my subconscious, right? Isn't that how it is? It's like flipped around.
Yeah, your
No,
unconscious or
I
shadow,
think
depending on
my
what terminology you're using.
unconscious.
My unconscious or shadow. Okay, there you go.
Yeah,
So,
my shadow. Yeah.
so being that is the case, if I hadn't done work, I think that Sharon and I wouldn't get along as well. And if she hadn't done work and stuff, and if she wasn't compassionate, we probably would annoy each other because we're so alike in that. And we would
And
like
different
see
in that way too.
and different too, because it's like an inversion, right? So we would, especially if it's in our shadow, because you might be displaying some kind of behavior that I also display, maybe that I don't like, and then I see you doing it, so I'll point to stuff like that. So I think that is one of the big things. So again, we're not telling people, this whole Myers-Briggs thing, it's like a tool, right? And that's the second part of what I'm going to say. But I feel like it shouldn't be an excuse to your behavior. If anything else, and that's the other thing. Okay, so the third thing I'll get into is how it's misused. But the second thing is it's a tool, right? Just like any other tool, it can be misused. So we're not like putting all our stock in this Myers-Briggs thing. We're not putting on a pedestal or worshiping it. But what we found is that it is very fascinating, and we found a lot of truth in it. So that's why we wanted to talk about it. And it seems to me that there are people, maybe corporations or governments or even like military, I guess would be part of the government, that definitely uses this stuff. Like, just from my own experience being in the Marine Corps, the people that I was around, because I worked on aircraft, and the people that were around me that were in my shop, we all had a lot of the same tendencies. It was really funny. Because the way that the shop that I worked on, ejection seats and air conditioning systems, and I worked with like liquid oxygen, that shop was called the seat shop, and because ejection seats. And we either had a lot of work to do or really nothing to do, so we just had to look busy, and all of us were like expert scammers. I think I've talked about this before. We were all really good at that. It was so funny how we fit in together, and I always wondered about that. But now thinking back on the ASVAB test that you take to get into the military, I'm sure there's some questions there. Maybe they're not using directly the Myers-Briggs, who knows, but they have at least an idea of their filtration system to get you into the certain jobs that you're put into, or the certain MOSs, I should say. That's what they. Yeah, so that's, I really want to say that in the beginning, because I mean, I guess most people that watch the show probably do know how we are with putting things on pedestals and not doing that. But if people are just tuning in, if this is your first time, thank you for watching and listening. But if you're just here for like Myers-Briggs info, that's how we stand on it. And I've also heard some misconceptions. Some people say that their type changes. Some people will say, this or that just based on tests. And I think what you guys said before, when we first started, you nailed it, was it really is user error, operator error, because we're expected to answer these questions of ourselves. But every other time in our life that we took a test, we're just trying to get the right answer. So we have that in our brains. And I mean, I've even taken tests and gotten different results. So I think that what we're going to talk about today is great, because it's really about, you'll find that there's ways to type people without taking tests. I'll just say that. Could there be another way to type people?
Yeah. And
So.
I was just going to say, to add to just quickly what Brandon said about people that think that your personality type can change, your MBTI personality type can change. I used to think that way. I used to think that it could change because, I used to be this way, but now I'm this way. And the way that I'll say it is to explain that is that you can enhance your like I was saying, you can work on yourself, and that way you can kind of ameliorate some of those quote negative tendencies potentially, or begin to be more balanced, right? But that doesn't mean your personality changed. It just means that you've grown, right? You've matured. So you can, I guess there's ways to see that too in the MBTI. There's you, I guess I think I've seen it in C.S. Joseph's literature that there's like a mature version of you, or like an immature version of you, and like a mature version of you. Um, but I haven't like delved deep into it. I just saw that. But anyway, Joe can probably say something to that.
Yeah, I don't see any evidence that it changes just because you scored different on different tests. Like we were just saying, that's operator error. It could change. I don't fucking know, but it doesn't look like it. It
Right,
does. So it seems to be your foundations. That's like, I'm a fucking white guy. I'm whatever. I have this color hair. I have these cognitive functions that I've developed, and that's how I experience the world and what my consciousness is, my personality is. You can change in the sense of quote unquote subtypes. We're not going to get into subtypes too much today. I'm not even that well versed in them. There's many different theories to further subtype the 16 personalities, and that seems to be more of a nurture kind of role. People like Dario Nardi, who's studied like brain scans and has been studying this stuff for decades now. Like he's shown like your subtype can change, and that your it changes based on your profession or your upbringing and the spiritual work you might do on yourself, on and on and on. You can develop the cognitive functions that you have and achieve a closer to balance, which will make you a more stable person, a more peaceful person, or a balanced person. But ultimately, yeah, I have, this is my opinion. Like I said, maybe your fucking type has changed. I don't fucking know. But I haven't seen any evidence of that. I probably can grow an extra 6 inches before my fucking personality type changes. So it's on that kind of level as far as I'm concerned. But
yeah, good point. Good point. Like I was earlier going to say, before I said what I said, I was going to say that I used to feel that way. And yeah, I don't know. I could be wrong, and maybe it could change. But from what I've seen now, it makes more sense that it's like what you're born with, kind of, and then you go from there. And yeah, you can modify and ameliorate some traits and stuff and balance yourself out. But for the most part, it's your character type.
And yeah, the way that I heard it explained that makes the most sense to me. I think it was C.S. Joseph too that said it was like, this is basically how you see the world. It's kind of like an operating system in a computer, and you could make all kinds of modifications and stuff to it. And again, it's not like you're not locked into it as far as the negative tendencies, like we've said, but you really could change certain aspects of yourself. And that's what I think is the most important thing when you first come across this stuff, is to get to know your type and how does it work. That's what I did. I mean, I went like hardcore down like rabbit holes and stuff looking into this stuff. But what you guys are talking about too is super important with the compassion thing, because you can have compassion for other people, because they start to annoy, well, in my case anyway, people start to annoy me a lot less now, because I just see that's the way that they do it. I'm like, all right, that's just the way that they see it. Okay, then we'll do it from here. It's up to me now, because I'm the one who did the work and I realized it. So I have to be the bigger person here, or whatever it is, I can't just feel like a victim because this person doesn't see things the way I do. And now I got to like tailor my whole thing to them. It's like, all right, well, you still have an opportunity to talk to this person. Right. But, with the compassion thing too, when Joe was talking, it made me think of this, which is really important. The most important compassion you can have is for yourself. And we've talked about this a lot on the show more recently. If you guys haven't seen episode 99 and episode 100, go check that out. We did a little review of the Oversharing show, kind of like a Oversharing for Dummies, explained ourselves, did the top 10 Oversharing tenets. So go check that out. And you can also hear me work through the word tenant as I say tenant. We haven't. I was listening to the when I was doing the editing, I was watching that part a few times. It's pretty funny. Excuse me. Sharon had to correct my English, but yeah, no, I think it really is important to have the compassion for yourself, and really all that means is whenever you perceive yourself as making a mistake, you're easier on yourself. You know, you don't call yourself stupid, or you don't get mad or angry at your own behavior. You have compassion for it the same way you'd have compassion for somebody else as you're going along in life. If somebody cuts you off in traffic and you're like, oh, maybe they're just in a rush because their kid's sick and they're trying to get to a doctor or whatever it is, you know, and you're like, okay, cool. Now we can go about my day. Same thing for yourself. If you do something you don't want to do, you partied a little too hard last night, you know, you're only going to take one shot. You don't even remember how many, and you wake up the next day. Instead of being mad, just have compassion for yourself. Understand, look at where you are in life. You're like, all right, well, I'm having a rough time at it. So I went out and partied last night. What am I going to do? You know, today's a new day. Let's do it. That's great. And, you know, you even get to the point where you're like, I'm glad that I did that. I'm glad I went out and partied. Now I feel like shit. Now I'm going to know next time I'm going to remember this feeling like shit, and maybe I won't party as hard. You know, it's just simple little things like that that really help, because I feel like if you're just having compassion for other people, you can turn into some kind of like people pleaser. And then you're really not helping yourself. And then when you're just trying to please people, you're not doing it from a genuine place. You know, there's all these things, but that's not what this episode's about. I just wanted to bring that up in the beginning. But
Yeah. Thank you. So before we actually ask Joe to give us a kind of an overview of how the types came about, unless he feels he's already done that, I want to just share the grid that C.S. Joseph put together. This may be an older image, but I just want to share it so that you guys can all see. So can you guys see what I am sharing?
Yep. Perfect.
Yeah. So there are 16 of these types, and these are the names of them. These 4, letters arranged in different order, and they represent different, I don't even know all the words, but but Joe does. So anyway, you have going down this way, you'll have these guardians, these artisans, this way, the intellectuals here. So when Joe was talking about the NT, the intellectuals, that's because this is what I've been typed as, ENTJ. Brandon he has been typed INTP, and Joe is INTJ. So we're kind of in these different things here. And there's lots of information here that we're not going to definitely be able to get into, but basically
just really quickly, all we need is an ENTP and we could start our own cult.
Sorry, yeah, your friend Ashley.
Yeah, there you go.
That's hilarious. That's funny. That's funny because I guess allegedly ENTPs tend to be these like cult leader types.
Quite often. No, I won't phrase it like that. Not most ENTPs are not cult leaders or anything like that. But
a lot of
when
cult
there is a cult leader, it's usually an ENTP.
Yeah. There you go.
Good call. Yeah. So Joe, you wanted to give a little bit of a background of like how Jung kind of came about all this.
Like we were kind of talking about earlier, Jung wrote this book, Personality Types, back in the 1920s. I've kind of skimmed through it a little bit. I have not completed it. Jung is very hard to digest. His personal works. Sometimes reading INTP's works, when they're really complex works, it can be very complicated. It takes a few times to go back and digest it. That's my experience. But basically, he wrote that book back in the 1920s. He, for those who don't know who Carl Jung was, he was a psychiatrist from Switzerland. He was a student of Freud. He actually took Freud's work and advanced it and went his own direction. Jung, unlike Freud, was not only kind of a scientist, but he was also an occultist. He studied all the occultism around the world. He's well versed in it. And he applied that to psychology or psychiatry, which was up and coming at the time. And He took a lot of critique at the time. Even Freud was saying this is not good to awaken occultism back into society, blah, blah, blah. Again, he was very critical of Jung. But because Jung dove into the esoteric, into the occult, he was able to see certain things that Freud and his contemporaries did not. So he, when it comes to what we're talking about today, he wrote that book, Personality Types, and basically he outlined what the cognitive functions he noticed. Like first off, he determined, okay, we seem to have 4 elements to human consciousness. We have thinking, feeling, sensing, and the intuition. And he further noticed by trial and error, and he was a therapist, he had many patients he used to see, that he saw certain patterns when it came to these cognitive functions. He noticed that sometimes a function was introverted and sometimes it was extroverted. So for instance, you could be an introverted thinker or an extroverted thinker. So Carl Jung noticed the cognitive functions and all that, and basically he came up with basically 8 personality types. And he called it one-sidedness. He basically would see what your lead function is, what's your strongest function, and he noticed that it was causing an imbalance in the person. It was causing neurosis, and he noticed that there's 8 basically types of neurosis, depending on what cognitive function, if it's introverted or extroverted, and this would cause problems for his patients. And he noticed that every time, say, he got an introverted thinker, a lead introverted thinker, or what do you call an introverted thinking personality, that they always had the same fucking issues. Maybe some, to different degrees, but they always had the same problems. I mean, he mostly, he was a psychiatrist, so he's focusing on mental illness mostly, or therapy, or whatever they call it, psychotherapy. So, so he determined that there was the 8 things, and he outlined this in this book. And then later on, Myers and Briggs, they were like, okay, so we know there's 8 personality types. Let's see if we could measure this. We'll create a test and see if we can give people a test and figure out what their personality type is. But they took it a little further. They turned it into 16 personality types. And the reason being is, so you got 8 basically, like Jung outlined, you got basically 8 imbalances, 8 different personalities where there's like one function leading it. And Myers and Briggs realized, well, technically speaking, there would be 16, because say you were, I don't know, you were a lead introverted thinker, and you would technically have the sensing, the perceiving functions. It could be either extroverted sensing and introverted intuition, or vice versa. So technically speaking, at 4x4, there would be 16 total combinations of cognitive functions in different orders. So that's how the 16 personality types basically came about. Even Jung was kind of, from what I understand, was kind of critical about that test, because one, you had operator errors like we were discussing earlier. Also, it's just something, it's really hard to replicate. It's hard to hold to science. The test, that is. That's why it's kind of like the scientific communities went on to different personality metrics, like what the big 5, like Peterson's always pushing, or what.
Are they still there?
Are you there?
Well, Joe cut off. So in the meantime, what I will say about the things he's talking about is that you have these different cognitive functions, and they're like 2 pairs, and they're kind of like, they go together. So you have intuition and sensing, and those go together. They're kind of like, they pair together. So those are called the perceiving or observing functions. And then you have the thinking and feeling, which also those go together. And the thinking and feeling are called the judging or deciding cognitive functions. And they can also be introverted or extroverted, as he was saying. So yeah, that's
I just sent him a message to see if he's
still online.
Oh,
There
here he
he's coming
comes.
back.
There we
Oh,
go.
there he
Hey,
goes.
that was on my end. Some reason my internet dropped out. Never does, but of course it's going to do it today.
No worries. I just explained to the audience about the two pairs. The intuition and sensing are pairs, and they are perceiving, observing functions. And then the thinking and feeling are the judging or deciding functions.
All right. I don't even remember where I left off, to be honest.
I think you were basically talking about those cognitive functions, and
More specifically, I think you were talking about the tests and how Jung realized it was user error and scientific method and all that, right?
Yeah, they really couldn't figure out a way to make this objective, to make this scientific. It was great theory, and it makes sense. But how do we test for this? And there's many tests that have come out. There's many tests online. I don't even know half of them are fucking even asking what they're measuring. I don't know how they're coming to a conclusion, I guess is what I'm saying. But like I was saying earlier, I was looking into how the tests are constructed, and then I knew that, hey, you can type people by their language, because people like Chase from C.S. Joseph have been doing that. I've come across him many years ago, and he was able to listen to your language and be able to figure out what cognitive functions you're using and apply certain metrics and be able to objectively figure out your personality type. And I looked more into it, and I found that there was a woman, an INTP. They're always INTPs, by the way.
That's funny. And Carl Jung, INTP. Carl Jung was an INTP.
Yes, Carl Jung. I mean, there's a lot of people out there claiming he's all kinds of things, but he's an INTP because you can read his language because he's written books, and you can figure out that if you follow the metrics that I'm about to talk about, yeah, he's an INTP. Most of the people who have developed this are INTPs. So yeah, there was. Yeah, okay.
I was just gonna say the lady that you came across.
Yes, Linda Behrens.
Yes.
She is also I think PhD in counseling or something, psychologist. And anyway, she got really into the MBTI stuff, and her team were able to gather, once they were able to figure out definitely, okay, this person's definitely whatever, an INTP, this person's definitely an ENTJ, blah, blah, blah. They would start noticing what characteristics or what patterns keep popping up for these different personalities. And when you get enough data, and you'd be like, okay, an INTP seems to always be systematic, or for just one metric. So basically what they did, and Sharon showed you the grid that Chase from CS Joseph put together, which is basically Linda Behrens' metrics, her grid. That's her grid, her psychometric grid that her and her team had created to figure out the 16 personality types. They basically just determine what is the most common metrics that they can identify for each type. Once you 100% know somebody's this type, if you do hours and hours and hours and hours of an analysis with somebody, you can figure out their fucking type. Because you just see, okay, they're using introverted thinking so much compared to everything else. You just gather data over a long period of time. You can figure out their type, but that takes forever. You can't create a test to do that. You can't just do that on the spot. It takes a long time, lots of psychoanalysis. So basically their team put together, from what I understand, they figured out what metrics by studying people like David Kelsey, or I believe that's what his name is, who kind of was furthering temperaments. Like, we've known about temperaments, that there was 4 temperaments since Plato's Republic. We've known this for thousands of years, that there's basically 4 different temperaments of people in the world. And so that seems to be pretty consistent. So she took that into account, and she took into that certain types communicated in a certain way, and they were able to put together the psychometric grid that you can, if you are able to identify, say, the communication style, certain elements of the communication style, certain metrics, and certain metrics of the temperaments, you can, plus identifying the cognitive functions, you can actually triangulate using this psychometric grid, triangulate exactly where on the grid the person is and give an objective fucking answer like that the test can't give. So basically you'll see that anybody who uses Linda Barron's metrics basically always come up to the same results. Like you'll have Chase, like, I don't know, listen to Malcolm X or something like that. And then another guy who knows his metrics applies the same metrics to Malcolm X, and they, shit, he's an ENTP. Like it always comes back ENTP. Like once somebody who knows the metrics, knows what they're doing, knows what they're looking for, can objectively figure out using this grid what personality type is. And it's pretty much like a cheat code. So you don't have to do hours and hours and hours and hours of analysis. You just, once you get really good at it, theoretically, you can do it in a few minutes. Listening to how somebody talks and identifying what their temperament is, how they communicate, what's their communication style, what cognitive functions are coming through the language, triangulate where on the grid they are, bam, you know their personality type. Now you know everything about like 80% of their fucking psychology right there. You know their weaknesses, you know their strengths, you know their gifts, you know their anxieties. That's the thing. People like, don't put me in a box. Well, motherfucker, you can be put in the box. I'm sorry to tell you. We could be put in a box, like because you might be, like we were talking about, more benevolent, more balanced than the next guy of your type, but you're going to have a lot of the same issues, and there's a lot of the same strengths, and on and on and on. So I'll pass it to you. And
so I was going to ask you if you wanted to start going through the cognitive functions and kind of describing what they look like. I know you had said you wanted to kind of do that. So
yeah, I want to try to make this simple, so I'm going to do my best. So because of this took a lot of time for me to figure out. So I don't, when people first get into this, they're like, I don't understand, this is going above my head. I'm like, yeah, I kind of get that. This was a subject that did take fucking study for me, because a lot of things, I'm not tooting my own horn, but I don't need to study. Like when I was in school, university, I never had to fucking study. Like there might've been like one class or something like that I actually had to study. I never had to fucking study. I just wing shit and do pretty well most of the time. But with this, I'm like, I can't wing this. Fuck, I got to actually like study this and sit there and figure it out and take notes and blah, blah, blah. So I'm going to try to make it simplistic. I'm going to try to give credit where credit's due, because I'm going to be explaining using certain terminology and metaphors that from people I've learned from. So things I found were kind of simple and they're easy to understand. So, okay. So basically Jung laid out, like we were talking about in the quote, you have sensing, feeling, thinking, and intuition. Those are the 4 elements. And they also introvert or extrovert. Now we have to understand that they're broken down into perceiving functions, which are basically how you take in the information. And then you have how you take in information and organize it. And then you have the judging functions. Yeah. And observe it. It's just another terminology. Everybody's using, that's another thing that's kind of frustrating with all this, is everybody's using different terminology. Yeah. Like it's just is what it is.
Perceiving and observing is the same.
Yeah, it's the same. It just depends who you ask. So, and then you have the judging functions, which are your thinking and feeling, which are how you make decisions, which are why some people call it deciding functions, because this is how you decide. So, so basically, not only did Jung figure out that the introvert or extrovert, but say the perceiving functions, sensing and intuition. If one starts to introvert, the other one extroverts. It's just a phenomenon of consciousness. Like anything, like when we talk about like the Kabbalion and the fucking principles behind consciousness, this is just the structure of consciousness. For some reason, you introvert intuition, extroverts the sensing. If you introvert the sensing, extroverts the intuition. And it's the same with the judging functions with thinking and feeling. If thinking starts to introvert, feeling extroverts, because they're attached, they work together. That's another thing with the axis that we have to understand, is they work together. And the biggest thing how Jung would determine the personality types, what I was saying earlier, he called it one-sidedness, is because your lead function is going to be the most developed function you have. So we'll use me as an example. I'm an INTJ. So my lead function is introverted intuition. So I have that on the axis with extroverted sensing. Now I have introverted intuition is my strongest function, and it has the most power. You could think of it in that terms, but it's really out of balance with this.
Oh no, did we lose him
Oh,
again?
no. Please don't. Please
Please
don't.
don't go. I'll bring
Please
it back
don't
to
break up.
us. Maybe there's there he
Oh,
is.
there he is.
You have an alien attack going on in Germany?
I guess, man, I don't know what the fuck's going on. I never lose internet.
That's so
That's
bizarre.
fine. That's all right. Take a drink. You look like you're coughing it out. I know what it's like when you get all coffee. Coffee.
Coffee.
So the types, the functions, that's what we're talking about, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Go ahead.
The
Continue.
cognitive functions.
All right. Where did I leave off before it cut out?
I think you were saying something about your lead function.
Oh yeah, I was just using that as an example. What I'm trying to demonstrate is that so I have a lead introverted intuition, which means I have on the fourth spot, I have an imbalance with the sensing. And yes, my intuition would be considered very powerful, but because it's out of balance, doesn't work correctly. Like for intuition to work correctly, it has to be in balance with sensing. The more it's in balance, the better it'll work. When it's completely out of balance, and for instance, that's what I was saying earlier, is how Jung identified the types, is that something is really out of balance. And in my case, he would consider me a introverted intuitive, but I'm really bad with the sensing. And because of such, even though my intuition is powerful, it's not always trustworthy, I guess, and it causes me a lot of problems. Now, we could take any personality type, I was using mine as an example, but everybody is going to have this imbalance. That's pretty much what's the main thing that's identifying your personality. So you could think of like that first imbalance, your strongest function. You could think of it like a 90-10 or an 80-20 or whatever. It's really out of balance. You can balance it, and that's ultimately the goal. So it functions better. But technically, it would be like even your second function, which is your second most powerful, but technically your best function, because it's more the two middle functions are more in a balance. Like it's more of a 60-40. Like it's almost 50-50. And some people, it might even be 50-50 or damn near close. Like you can't actually technically measure that part. You can just see the imbalance. But so yeah, the lead and the inferior function, as to call it, the fourth spot, that's really out of balance. And the two middle ones are a little more balanced. So in my case, I'm known as a single, some people could use this terminology, a single observer, because I don't use both of my functions the way I should to observe and take in information. But I'm a double decider, because my two middle functions are pretty much in a decent balance. So I don't really have problems for my judging functions for the most part, but I have problems for my perceiving functions. And
Okay, I think I understand what that means now, because I never, I think I hear, what is that channel that you told me about, the husband and wife?
Oh yeah, objective personality, which I
think
highly
they do
recommend.
the double decider, single observer type thing, and I was like, what are they talking about? I think I get it now.
I find that channel brilliant. It's just that they use all their own terminology, which can be frustrating.
Yeah, I mean, I would probably find them brilliant if I understood it. Eventually, maybe I will. So when you when you and I were talking about the show that we were going to do, you said you wanted to talk about thinking as reasoning, feeling as values, intuition as imagination and abstracting, and sensation as sensory info and experience. Do you want to break it down that way to explain things?
Let's do it like that. Sure. All right. I guess we'll start with the judging functions, thinking and feeling. So we all kind of know what thinking and feeling is, and you're basically right, but how you define it. But but as far as psychology goes, or this Jungian psychology that we're going to be talking about today, the simplest way you can boil down thinking and feeling these cognitive functions is thinking is reasons. It's your reasons for doing something. And it's attached to feeling. And what is feeling? You could boil it down to your values. What do you value? What do you like? What do you dislike? And it's attached. So the feeling and thinking are attached. So you can kind of see, okay, you have a feeling, you value something. These are your reasons. Like, especially if you're like a lead, you have more power in the feeling side. You're more imbalanced towards the feeling side. Then it's basically like, I like this. And then I give the reasons. While a thinker, like let's say Brandon or Sharon, who both have lead thinking, they'll be like, okay, these are my reasons, and this is why I value. So it's basically like that. So that's the easiest way you could think about it. If it's introverted, we'll say if feeling is introverted, then you're more focused on your values, what you value. And that's about it. Maybe you care about the values of your closest people, whatever, but you, for the most part, you don't give a shit. It's my fucking values. I don't care about their values. Fuck them. But, well, not exactly, but you get what I mean. But, however, if say you're an extroverted feeler, all that means is that you don't just look at your values, you look at the tribe's values, you look at the group's values, you look at humanity's values. They say, like, say if you have the same amount of energy going into introverted feeling as you do for extroverted feeling, it's the same amount of energy, but think of like a hose. When you kink the hose and it spray, because you gave it a smaller hole, it sprays farther, there's more power. You could think of that's how introverted feeling will work. And extroverted feeling will be more like expanded because you're taking the values of everybody. Now that's just the easiest way to break those down. It gets a lot deeper. There's tons of correlations. It kind of reminds me of like, astrology or fucking crystals or whatever. There's all kinds of like correlations that you could keep adding to, okay, feeling, thinking, blah, 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 to compete, continue to understand it, to further expand upon it, blah, blah, blah. But in the simplest terms, feeling, values, thinking, reasons. And the same as we were just discussing with the feeling, the thinking can be the same way. If you're focused mostly on your reasons, you're an introverted thinker. However, if you focus on the tribe's reasons, all the reasons that are possible out there, the whole spectrum of reasons, you're an extroverted thinker. Now the introverted thinking, feeling, and extroverted, blah, blah, will show up in different ways in the language. It will show up in how we experience it. And maybe we can expand on that later. But so basically that's what thinking and feeling, if you want to boil it down to its simplest fucking understanding, that's what it is. Now, intuition and sensing, your perceiving functions, your observing functions, are a little trippier. Okay, so you sensing and intuition essentially are the same thing. The sensing is going to be this realm, this objective realm that we're all experiencing. And the intuition will be in all those abstract realms that we can create whole simulations and imagination, et cetera, in our own fucking minds. We can create our own fucking worlds. So basically, you can boil it down to intuition just to be abstracting and imagination, and sensing, it's pretty self-explanatory. It's just your five senses, like, so it's concrete. It's the actual objective world. So basically, they're the same thing, and they're also on an axis. And you're going
when
to
you say
lean.
axis, I just want to be clear. When you say axis, they're like pairs. They go together.
Yeah, they're paired. They're linked. They're connected. You can never disconnect them. They're always connected. So, yeah, you use your intuition and your sensing together, just like you use your feeling and thinking together, to perceive the world, to take in information and to organize it. In the case of intuition and sensing. So yeah, that's basically how you can boil it all down. Introverted and extroverted. So if you have introverted perception function. Its main task is basically to organize. So if you're an introverted intuitive, you are using your intuitive capability to organize and get everything down to one point, to one pattern, to one pattern basically. While if you are an extroverted intuitive, you're looking at the spectrum. You're looking at all the possibilities, all the patterns. Brainstorming, basically, you can think of that. That's extroverted intuition. And when it's the sensing is introverted, and becomes the organizing factor. I forgot to say the extroverted intuition is also when a perceiving function is extroverted, it gathers in information. That's its primary job. When it's introverted, it organizes. So basically, like an extroverted intuitive is going to gather in all these fucking patterns, and the introverted ones are going to try to all get it down to one fucking pattern. How I always see it in my mind is, those plasma balls, that you used to see in Spencer's or whatever, and the little lightning bolts are going everywhere. You could think of extroverted intuition as when you just leave it alone and lightning bolts are going everywhere. They're touching all around the surface. And introverted intuition is like when you touch the glass and then all of a sudden all the static goes to that one point on your finger. So to me, that's a good metaphor, if it works for anyone else. But
thank you.
So that's the intuition aspect, the abstract aspect, and then you have the sensing, which is more concrete, more objective. We all experience it together. And when it's the sensing introverted, it takes the sensory data and organizes it and compartmentalizes it on and on and on. And when it's extroverted, the sensing that is, it, instead of organize, it gathers the sensory data from the external world. I want to also say that even though we have personality types, the better way I've heard it explained is we have personality preferences. Like Brandon has INTP preferences. Sharon has ENTJ preferences. That means that they prefer to use certain cognitive functions in a certain way, and those are their go-to fucking functions. But technically speaking, we use all of them. Everybody has used all of them at some point. It's just say, I don't know, you're a lead introverted thinker. You can extrovert think. You can easily extrovert think. You've done it many times, but you don't have a preference to do it like that. You prefer to go to your introverted thinking. You try your extroverted thinking for, 20 minutes. You're like, man, fuck this. This sucks. This takes too much fucking energy, too much time. I'm going back to my own fucking thinking. Like that's basically how we see this play out. I guess I'm just going to hand it to you guys because I know this can be complicated. Maybe you can narrow me down so I can explain stuff better.
I think one distinction that we could, one of the easier ones would be the difference between introverted and extroverted in the personality type, because
that's a good point.
A lot of, exactly. Because I'll tell people that I'm an introvert technically, and they see me as a DJ or on stage as a comedian or, just talking in front of a bunch of people with no problem. And they're like, well, how are you an introvert? Or even like at a party with a bunch of people, I could like be the center of attention. They're like, how? And just like Joe said, it's a preference. So I prefer, or my brain or whatever it is, prefers to be introverted, but I can extrovert and be an extrovert. It's just that when I'm doing that, it kind of drains me. It takes my energy away. And then when I'm introverting, which is another thing about introversion that I don't really hear a lot of people talk about, but I've heard this from C.S. Joseph, where basically two's company, three's a crowd. So you could still be in an introverted situation with one other person. So if it's just you and one person and you're an introvert, you're not really going to waste your energy or whatever. You're not going to get run down as much as you would as if it was a group of people. So that's just a distinction I wanted to make. And if you want to add anything, obviously, Joe, go ahead and do that. But then, so that would be the same thing for extroverts. If you're an extrovert, it doesn't mean you can't be in an introverted situation by yourself or with one other person. Like, it doesn't mean you're going to go crazy. It just means that it's draining and you get your energy from a group of people. I don't know if that's the right way to put it. Go ahead.
I do want to say something about that because I've watched enough videos about what introverted extroverted means in MBTI, and I just wanted to give just a quick perspective.
Yeah.
I'm going to share a portion of my screen of my spreadsheet that I've made for myself because it's helpful to me as an ENTJ, I might say. So these are the 16 personality types here listed here. And here, these are some of the names of the different, we didn't talk about this yet, but we'll talk to Joe about it. This is what is called the function stack. And for each type, you have the different cognitive functions. So when you see FE, that is why do I keep wanting to say external? That's extroverted feeling. And this I right here represents introverted. That N represents intuition. This E is extroverted. That S is for sensing. The I here is introverted, and the T is for thinking. So when someone says, or I'll just say, when you look at one of these, for example, this ENTJ, this is my type. So when you see this ENTJ, and like me, I have gotten to the point where yes, that E is there and it represents extroverted, but I have come to a point in my life where I do enjoy spending time, doing things on my own and things like that. So in that regard, I've become a lot more introverted in a sense. So I feel like I've balanced a lot. But that said, that E doesn't, the way I've heard it explained in videos, this E doesn't necessarily mean you're like you're just this massive extrovert. It corresponds to the E for this first cognitive function. This is your main cognitive function. And so this E that's all that this is for. It's representing this. So this is saying that my first cognitive function, whatever it is extroverted. So I just wanted to give that little breakdown there. And that's how I have come to understand what it means. Joe.
Yep. That's pretty much how Sharon broke it down. That's basically what, when they say you're an extrovert or introvert, they're talking about your lead cognitive function, your identified personality. I don't even know what your one-sidedness cognitive function. And really,
does this lead us to the stacks, or was there something else you wanted to?
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I kind of got distracted because I thought my internet cut out again. I'm like, oh,
okay, good.
All right. No, so technically, actually, and I'm quoting Dave's superpowers. Sharon was talking. Me and Sharon were talking about that earlier. How Dave's superpowers put it is there's no such thing as an extrovert or an introvert. You heard the term ambivert. Basically, everybody's an ambivert. Everybody is an ambivert. We all have. Sometimes we're introverted, sometimes we're extroverted, but we do have cognitive functions, and the cognitive functions introvert or extrovert. And if we have a preference towards an introverted function, and that's our strongest function, we're going to fall into introversion, into our own internal worlds more than not. And vice versa if you're an extrovert. But technically, everybody's an extrovert, everybody's an introvert. Everybody is an introverted sensor, everybody's an extroverted sensor, on and on and on. As we just said earlier, we have preferences. So because all the time when people find out their types, they're like, well, sometimes I do it like this or something. Yeah, we understand that. We all do, but you have preferences, and that's what we are identifying. So.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah.
And I like how
I'll turn it over.
Oh, I was just gonna say I like how my battery's not. Second, computer's bugging.
I might have something else to say. Can I?
Yeah, go ahead.
Do you mind if I jump in? I'm going to share my screen again, just to say something about this here. So when you have your lead function, for example, here, and when we were talking about axis or axes, the F and the T, the feeling and the thinking, are always tied together. So when you have a feeling, whether introverted or extroverted, your main lead function is going to be that, right?
Yep.
Now, your the its opposite is always going to be an introvert. So you have E here and you have I here. And it will always be your, I mean, I guess they call this the inferior function in some places. I put different names here for other things that I saw, just for my memory, but it's mostly called the inferior function. And your inferior and your dominant or your lead, these are always going to be your first and fourth position.
Your
And then
major
you,
imbalance, I'll add. But yeah, go
yeah,
ahead.
that's because of the major imbalance that Joe was talking about. And so your secondary or your auxiliary function, okay, so these two come from what, let's see, just quickly my notes here. Um, what was I looking at? F and T are your judging functions, your judging and deciding functions. So those are your judging and deciding functions for these two right here. And then these are going to be your perceiving functions, perceiving and observing functions. So the two middle ones are your from your secondary auxiliary. So it's going to be one or the other. And these two are on an axis as well. So when your secondary function is an introverted function, it's like the tertiary or the third one, which is sometimes called the child, is the extroverted. And they're always going to be opposites and they're always going to be tied together. So I don't know if I explained that very well, but I just wanted to make that a little bit more clear.
No, perfect. I'm really glad you actually brought that to the game today because it helped a lot with that visualization. It's really
Yeah.
hard to
So
describe in words.
basically,
Yeah.
what you have is like Sharon said, there really are only, or like you guys are saying, there really are only two things. Like you have a scale, so you have feeling and thinking on one scale, and then sensing and intuition on another scale. And then just depending on your personality type, it just depends on which one your preference is heavier toward, right? And it, like you said, doesn't mean that you have to do it this way or whatever, but it's just the way that you prefer. And it's funny because my personality type, the biggest thing that I've heard about it is INTP, is that you have to get out of your comfort zones. And I
Mhm.
could see that so much. Like sometimes I get in a comfortable place and I'm like, oh, this is great. I'm just like, oh, I don't need to do anything. I got this all set up. I'm like a little crab, my little cancer crab. I'm like, I got my shell. I'm good. Um, but what people don't realize is there's always something better, always something you can do. And you have to get out of your comfort zone as an INTP anyway. I mean, I think getting out of your comfort zone for most types is probably good advice, but for the INTP, it's really good because I feel like there's this, amazing. Everyone says INTPs are amazing and so smart and have all this potential. And they do have that, but they can use that smart amazingness to just make themselves comfortable. And then they're good. They don't have a reason to stretch up and farther and beyond. And I think that's why going to the Marine Corps for me was so huge because it got me out of my comfort zone. Like, I mean, there's no other way, join the Army or Joe knows or the Marine Corps. That'll get you out of your comfort zone, especially if you're a teenager or like in your early 20s, right?
Yep.
So I think that just goes back to what we were saying about preferences. And if you really want to do, I guess, improve yourself, or if you just want to try different things or whatever, it really is about getting out of your comfort zone and trying new things. And I feel like breaking patterns is huge too, because patterns really go along with this personality types. Certain people that prefer things will get stuck easily in patterns because if you prefer this thing, and then say you have a wound, some kind of wound or whatever, like an emotional wound, or trauma, it's going to make you, I think, more easily stuck in that pattern. And if you could just break patterns and get out of your comfort zone, I think that's like 50% of all this stuff.
Okay, so that's you as an INTP. Is that what you were saying?
Well, I think as an INTP, that's one of the most important things is to get out of my comfort zone. But I think that is good for everybody else as well. Maybe just not as much if you're not an INTP. But the whole breaking pattern thing, I think, is works for all the personality types. I think it's
Yeah.
huge.
I
What's
was,
going on?
oh,
Uh-oh.
it's, it's slow. I was just going to share my screen again real quick, Joe looks like he bounced out,
All right.
but just to show, that Brandon is an INTP here. So his dominant function, his lead function is introverted thinking. So if you can imagine, Brandon is introverted thinking because it's almost like he's always in his thoughts about his own stuff, his own realm, his own thoughts. So that's the introverted thinking part of him. So that's why it's probably good for him to break pattern, because he's always in his mind, he's always in his thoughts. And then so with that regard, and I don't know as much about this as Joe does, but we can look and see that his absolute weakest function is extroverted feeling. And it's in an imbalance. It's in a great imbalance, because that makes it hard for him, this is what I'm thinking. It makes it hard for him to know how others are feeling. Is that true, Brandon?
Yeah, yeah.
Extroverted feeling. So that's like what others' feelings are. And that's very tough for him. So if he could work on that, it would help him have more compassion. We see you, Joe. You're back.
Oh, thank you.
You're back. You there? Okay.
You
So
know,
I was, go ahead.
yeah, it's actually, maybe this is happening for a reason. Because it's trying to make me spiral, so you can see the reason why I spiral, because my imbalance. So
Okay, so I was just showing Brandon's huge imbalance, which is he's always in his thoughts, TI, right? Introverted thinking. And then his inability to perhaps be able to understand others' feelings because of the extroverted feeling as his weakest, his inferior function. So if we look at Joe, who is right above INTJ, he's introverted intuition and extroverted sensing. So do you want to just talk about that so we can have like an example?
okay. Anything specific?
Maybe just kind of how I just said about Brandon, like he's in his mind a lot and his thoughts about himself, and so he can get stuck doing that. And then his weakest function is his inability to be able to see others' feelings.
I'd like to add really quickly too, because the external, you can even come off this if you want for a second. Yeah, the external, the extroverted feeling, that also has to do with the way I perceive my exterior world. Like basically,
Yeah.
it's not real to me. Like I used to break cell phones all the time. I bump into things constantly. If I'm not like super paying attention, I'll step on things. It's because the external world is just not real to me. I think that's why I do so well with all this occult stuff. And like you said, I get lost in my thoughts a lot. I'm in my head building these like paradises that I exist in inside my mind. And then in the real world, I'm like tripping over things. So
Yeah, you're
that sound right, Joe?
INTP.
Yeah.
INTP, you have, and we'll get into this later, the cognitive attitudes. But basically, your extroverted sensing is in your seventh spot, which is known as the blind function, or your incompetent function, or however you want to phrase it, whatever terminology you're using. But basically, it's the function that you're really not good at. You're not even aware of it. You're like totally lost. That's why they call it blind or incompetent or
Blind
whatever.
spot, yeah.
And yeah, in an INTP or an INFP, that would be extroverted sensing. So what Brandon was just explaining, yeah, INTPs, that's kind of a characteristic of them, is they're very oblivious to the external world. Not that they can't experience the external world, but they're really, really bad at it.
Yeah, the preference is right to do that. But I've noticed though, I got a new cell phone 2 months ago, and it's still in really good shape. It's like the first phone I got in like, I don't know, 3 or 4 years, maybe longer. And but I think it's because, like you said, you have to just like work on yourself and be aware of these and remind it. It's kind of like you have to develop your own positive habits, for these things. And but the good thing about that is when I realized that, I wasn't always so hard on myself when things would happen. I'm like, oh, I get it. It's just the way that I see the world. I got to remember that I'm 6'5" and I'm gonna bump into things. My arms are like so long. It's like I got to be very aware because I'm always knocking things over and whatever. But it just explains my behavior. So I use that for myself, and this is again why I recommend this to people. Get to know yourself, know thyself. This is one of the best ways. And yeah.
Especially for the intellectual temperaments, because we, generally speaking, come up with systems, structures to give us like an artificial leg, so to speak. Or like in Brandon's case, like with the extroverted sensing, he comes up with systems so he could get by with extroverted sensing because he's not that good at it. So he comes up with a system to get by through life.
Yep.
Yeah. Sharon would do the same thing because she would have a SI or introverted sensing trickster. So not the best memory. So she comes up with systems. That's why if you ever notice, lead TE people, lead extroverted thinkers like an ENTJ are extremely, extremely fucking organized. Like if you want somebody to organize, like find an ENTJ or ESTJ. My grandfather was an ESTJ, I believe, but he's a listed extroverted thinker, lead extroverted thinker. So they come up with these using their good function, the ones their preference or the preference functions, the ones they're really good at. They come up with systems, and it would be the same way. I guess you could say why I study this or why I get into spirituality, because my blind function is extroverted feeling. I have no idea what other people value. I have no empathy. Well, we'll get into that because like empathy and sympathy and how it's tied into the feelings, but I don't feel other people's emotions. I feel my emotions. I could put myself in other people's shoes via extroverted thinking and feel sympathy, but I have no empathy. I don't understand why people value the things they do. It's very hard for me to be compassionate. And this is kind of my system, my structure, like we were talking about earlier. I'm using that based off the things I'm good at, like understanding this. Like this is a hard subject, but I can understand it, and it's helping me. It's giving me an artificial leg where I don't understand other people's feelings, because in this world, you really have to take other people's values and feelings into consideration. You can't go through life, trust me, without doing something to better yourself in that area. So,
well,
I mean, you could, but
yeah, you could, I guess. I don't want it to be like that.
No, I hear you. Go ahead, Sharon. Sorry.
I am going to share my screen again, but this time I've expanded this screen to include this other side of it, which was when we talked about the shadow side, or some people call it the unconscious. When Joe was talking about would you say the seventh, would you call it?
Yeah, they call it the trickster, the blind function, the incompetent function, whoever uses.
There's so many words, right? So I just wrote these because I've seen it called trickster, and you just said blind function, so I just added that. But this is how it looks in a table format. But there are what they call 4 sides of the mind, right?
Mm-hmm.
Joe, so you have not only these, but then you have 2 more.
Mm-hmm.
So that's when Joe was talking about, 5th or 7th or whatever. That's what he's talking about. So Joe was talking about NTJ, my blind function was introverted sensing. Okay. So yeah. Anyway, I just wanted to show that so people know what we're talking about. Otherwise, it's a little bit abstract.
Mm-hmm.
A little bit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this is a very abstract. That's the thing. You'll see that most of the people that get into this are not always, but more times than not, abstract types, because we're more attracted. We actually abstract a lot, so this resonates with
Used
us
to
more.
it.
That's right. And if you're not, go ahead. You're breaking up.
What I was saying is that it's extremely, extremely rare to like. I'm sure it's possible. I'm sure it does happen, but like say like we were showing the temperaments earlier, and we're the intellectual temperaments. We're an abstract
Let me
folk.
share it real quick. So
Yeah,
here, right
perfect.
here.
So we're abstract,
Right
like, and
here.
you'll see to the far left the temperament of the Guardians, which are 40% of the population, or prefer have a preference to use their sensing more than their intuition. It's very rare they get into MBTI. I mean, if there's like a study teams and stuff like that, like Linda Barron's or Dario Nardi or whatever, they gather people from everywhere and type them and fucking gather information on them. But people who actually seek this information out, it's almost always on the right side of that grid right there. It's in the intellectuals.
The
I've seen some
abstract.
ESFPs and ISFPs too. So the artisans will jump in there sometimes, but I've not seen any Guardians. And
That's
actually,
funny.
and it's not just that. Let's think about like spiritual stuff or occultism or quote unquote truther stuff. It's kind of the same deal. You'll see mostly clusters of the abstract personality types who get into that. You don't really see as much with the concrete types, the sensor types on the left side of that grid. Though I have been doing this last months. I have come across some artisan temperaments that are into like truther stuff, but they approach it very different than us though. Like I've noticed they're more like, oh, the government, the politicians, they don't really go past that surface kind of level, but they might still be kind of truther, kind of oriented or spiritual oriented or whatnot. So it's not to say that we abstract people have all the rights to that, but we definitely are more clustered in those type of, I don't know what to call it, genres or whatever.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense because Guardians, I think I'm getting this right, but I think they're more about the status quo because they're trying to kind of guard the way things are, and go ahead. Is that right?
Yeah, that's pretty much right. And another thing, I mean, that particular one that Chase put together says, okay, the 15% intellectuals of the population, 15% are idealists, 30% are artisans, 40% are guardians. So let's say we go by those stats because they're basically in the most general sense. Different people collected different data. Some say like the intellectuals are 8% or 10% or 15%. It varies, but basically, if we go by this, 70% of the fucking population are concrete people. They don't really abstract. They don't really have a preference for abstracting. They're very about this physical material world. And while the other 30% are abstract, they're more in that abstract realm I was talking about, like in your head, or so to speak, or being able to see patterns beyond the actual five sense reality, which makes a lot of fucking sense if you think about it. Like we're always like, oh, we're such a minority. Yeah, because look how few of us are abstract next to the fucking the guardians, the artisans there, the concrete folk. Like it explains everything, explains fucking everything as far as I'm concerned. And I've seen even numbers where it's like 8% are intellectuals or 8% are idealists. And we're looking at like 85% of the population would be in the artisan or guardian, which would be sensors. And if you're turn out to be, you get typed someday and you're a sensor, it doesn't mean you can't abstract, by the way. Like my significant other here is a sensor. We have a couple people in the oversharing community that are sensors that are very can abstract and are very cool people. Like, so not to say that, okay, you can't, you're a fucking normie NPC if you're a fucking concrete. That's not exactly the case. But what I am saying is, say the NPC or the normie are definitely clustered in those 8 types on the left, and there's more clusters of in the abstract folk for truthers or people into spirituality or occultism, stuff like that. Because a concrete, somebody's really concrete and is not really going to make those jumps in the abstract, is not really going to give shit about like things like occultism. They're not even going to fucking understand it. Like they don't even believe it exists. Like some of them. So
yeah, awesome.
Well,
So there,
really quickly, sorry, I was muted so I could. I was going to say is so for the concrete people, if you are here and you're watching and you're listening, it's good on you because you overcame a lot of things to get here. So it's like what we're talking about, working on yourself and seeing the world in a different way. And and acting against your own preferences is what led you here. So welcome.
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the next topics I think we were going to talk about is psychometrics, and I don't really know what this is about, so I'm hoping Joe can go ahead and take the lead
That's
here.
basically what we talked about earlier with the Linda Barron's grid.
Oh, okay.
Psychometrics is, think of it as an abstraction, the grid as in the abstract world. That this is an abstract fucking idea. There's a horizontal fucking part of the grid that's for your temperaments, and your communication styles are vertical, and then it's all arranged onto this fucking grid. That's what psychometrics are.
Okay.
And by identifying the metrics that put you on that grid, so you're able to triangulate onto the grid, that's the whole concept. That's how these tests are built. This is how this grid was built, so we can type people just by their language, which is awesome, by the way. And yeah, that's basically all psychometrics is. It's just measuring certain abstract things, because psychology is very abstract. It's not exactly a hard science. It's a science, but it's an abstract science.
Yeah, and when Joe says type people by their language, he means by the way that they speak, the words that they use, all that stuff. The way that you prefer to speak will give you away.
Mm-hmm. Yep, given enough time and given that the person knows what they're looking for, they got your number. And like Brandon was saying earlier, how like the governments know about this stuff and they use it. I've come across enough, like for instance, like CIA agents will study this, because if they can nail somebody's fucking personality type, they can better extract information from them, etc. Because their weaknesses, their issues, how to get in there, how to, yeah. So
Well,
I
not
know people
even.
don't like. Yeah, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, not even CIA. Like, someone who says they're a psychic, or someone who says, who knows, or a salesman, or anybody that comes in your life can have this information, and based on the way you talk, you can give yourself away, giving them extra, I don't know, ammunition against you or whatever. That's another reason I think it's really important to be aware of this stuff, because I feel like if you are,
And to heal it too, because if you can be balanced about it, it'll be harder for them to detect what you are.
or not, yes, harder for them to detect, then also harder for them to get the outcome that they want from you,
Yeah.
because
Yep.
if you're not
Yeah.
exactly acting in your little box like you're
Yeah.
supposed to, then
Yeah.
they won't know, And
Exactly.
that's the thing. Like, we're looking at this stuff because we want to be compassionate toward people and we want to understand people. But there is another side of this. Like we said, it's a tool. This could be used either way. So,
Yeah, there's a lot of people out there are learning how to do this by the language, so they can like beat you in sales, or like to sell you something, or
or
to
have
get
sex with you.
sex. Yeah,
Yeah.
or yeah, stuff like
Because
that. Because yeah.
I looked a lot into that whole pickup artist culture that was around, like probably in the mid 2000s to like mid 20 teens. I mean, maybe people are still doing it, but it's very interesting. But it's basically how to pick up women easily, and it uses a lot of psychology, and a lot of the stuff that I saw in there. I read this book. What was the guy's name? Neil Strauss. He's an author. He wrote a bunch of stuff. He wrote like Courtney Love's autobiography, or he helped her write it. And he was a Rolling Stone author, or he was a writer for Rolling Stone magazine, and he could never figure out how to pick up women, even with like all his. He had like kind of fame and money or whatever, but he just couldn't figure out. And reading all this stuff, he embedded himself with these people that were pickup artists, and he actually made himself a better person. Like, he had to go through all this self healing, basically, that we talk about to get to where he was to then talk to people. And a lot of people use that to like find a wife, but some people do use it just to hook up with like tons of women. So um it's funny because I studied that all after I got out of like, being a man
Your
whore.
ways.
Yeah, I was watching it after. I'm like, oh, I could have used some of these techniques. No, but it was
You
just
got to
fascinating
change
to.
your evil ways.
Yeah, exactly. But that's another reason why this stuff is, to me, it's so important. Not only the self knowledge part of it, but to just kind of better protect yourself, I guess, in situations.
Good call.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's definitely, for that reason alone, worth looking into. And I know it's kind of complicated when you first start looking into this, but trust me, it gets easier in time. At least it did for me. So,
Yeah, it got easier for me
I
too.
think it's the terminology. Like you were saying, everybody uses different terminology. We just need
Yeah.
one giant cult and they can have all their own terminology.
yeah,
Consolidate, please.
Yeah.
it's kind of frustrating because it did kind of like for a while land in the rubbish bin for like pseudoscience. Like people picked it up and dusted it off and ran with it in so many different ways, and so many different concepts and terminology have evolved over time. So part of the challenge was finding like who the fuck is credible? Like, because everybody's saying different terminology and different ideas, and it's like, all right, so what's credible? What has data behind it? What is the actual science? Which that's what led me to Linda Barron's, and because you can actually reproduce her result, you can use the psychometrics to get the same fucking results. And you need to know somebody's proper personality type or personality preferences to be able to do anything, because you can't even like nail them. Like it's not going to help you much. So that was the first thing. And then finding people who have collected actual data and not just parroting. Like, like this is like anything on the internet. There's like tons of fucking bullshit, and it's hard finding what you need to know, the truth, so to speak.
So
or at
one
least the
thing
science in this case. But
yeah, no, exactly. Well, right. Who knows even what science is these days? Like what science is supposed to mean. One thing I did want to ask you though, while we still have you here, is what are some of the ways that you use this in your own life to, either get along better with people or just to raise your consciousness? What are some of the ways that you've taken this knowledge and incorporated it?
one, it's helped me understand my woman better, knowing her personality type and mine, and how I see the world and how she sees the world. I can talk to her better, especially now that I know her actual type. Yeah, for the longest time, I didn't even know her actual type. I was going off the test, and then when I actually learned how to do this, well, first she took the test on C.S. Joseph and found that she was actually a different type. And when I first read that, I'm like, really? No. But then as I was learning these metrics over the last months, I was starting to notice she had a lot of preferences that didn't add up to that fucking personality type. She was supposed to be quote unquote INFP, and it turned out she was an ESFP, and totally different from an INFP, totally different cognitive functions, somewhat different stack, different tendencies. So when I actually learned this, it was actually, I could communicate it with her a little better. I mean, we've always been pretty good couple, and we never really had that bad of issues, but it helped in that sense. It's helped me understand my friends a little better. But the biggest one, I guess, is for me. The thing is, I already sort of knew this and started going down this direction before I even really discovered this, but discovering it shed a lot of light on it. Like I was saying earlier, I would be considered a single observer, in the sense that I have a lead introverted intuition, and on that axis that Sharon was showing earlier, I have extroverted sensing in the inferior spot. So there's a huge imbalance. And one of the biggest parts of that imbalance was coming to false conclusions or jumping to conclusions. Like, for instance, I'd give like a little example. So kind of what I'm talking about is, like, Sandra and I were driving a couple weeks ago down this suburb, and there's this girl walking in the middle of the road, and her head was down like this. So what I see, that her head down, I identified that pattern with my intuition. I'm like, oh, she must be looking at her phone, right? And then I get up to her, and no, she's not looking at her phone. She's just kind of looking down, blah, blah. So I jumped to a conclusion. Oh, she's fucking looking at her phone, blah, blah, blah. No, she wasn't. Like I just put that pattern together with my intuition, that my abstracting, but I didn't, I had enough sensory data to know that there a pattern might exist when somebody's going down like this, walking oblivious in the middle of the road. But I ignored, once I actually got the real sensory data, I'm like, oh, well, I jumped to a conclusion. She wasn't fucking looking at her phone. I mean, that's a silly example, but I had a tendency to do this my whole life, and people would intuitive imbalances like an INTJ or an INFJ or an ENFP or an ENTP, where the intuition is in the front, like it's the most powerful one, and you have a inferior sensing. You have a problem with jumping to fucking false conclusions or not taking sensory data into account. Because like I was saying earlier, for intuition to work optimally, to work the way it's supposed to, the way God intended, it needs to be in kind of a balance with the sensing. You need the sensory data to find the fucking patterns. Like you can't just put together patterns and theories and abstractions and not have the fucking sensory data, where you're having these huge fucking leaps between sensory data points. Like you're connecting dots that really shouldn't be connected. Like that is a fucking issue. And that can fuck up your life, because if you're making decisions out of a false I don't know what to call it, structure, like belief system. Yeah, paradigm. Perfect. If you're making decisions out of a false paradigm, natural law doesn't give a fuck. It doesn't care that you're ignorant, like to that. It's you're going against fucking natural law, and it's going to have negative fucking repercussions in your life. And that is one issue with having a imbalance with the intuition. Like for instance, I noticed like you and Sharon are single deciders, so you have more balance in your observing functions, your intuition and your sensings. And I noticed like you guys can take in new theories, but not become like fanatical or like beating people down with it. I don't know if you guys were like that in the past, maybe because those functions could be imbalanced too, but you're more balanced. So you don't really see that as much with like you guys, but like people like me or like an ENFP or an ENTP, very imbalanced to jump to fucking conclusions. So you're just saying something, Sharon, because I don't hear it.
But ENFP? ENFPs do that?
Yeah. So yeah, it's
the jump to conclusions, Matt, remember from Office Space.
Yeah, jumping to conclusions, coming up with fucking bullshit conspiracy theories, like intuition is a great thing. Like I said, if it's in balance with your sensing, you could, everything has come into our existence because of that intuition, because that's how we manipulate the world. Like that's how we can take an abstraction and bring it into reality and manipulate the physical world to bring that abstraction into reality. Like so, but if you don't have the sensory fucking data because you don't want to look at it because it's uncomfortable, because that's your imbalance, that's your weak, you're like, yeah, I'll figure out the fucking pattern, fuck the sensory. Like it's like it doesn't work out so well. And it's also I have a tendency in my life to single observers to freak out about things, to spiral over things, like my internet going like it's like I have my days where I could really spiral, but I think I'm getting better. And like I've learned years ago, being in the truther community, how much bullshit is out there. Absolute bullshit. I don't care. Making a claim, bullshit. 80% of shit out there is bullshit. And like
90.
Yeah, probably more closer to that. And the rest of it is on a spectrum. It might be partly true, but it's not black and white. But but I learned a long time ago that like, okay, people come up with these theories, but what evidence you got? And then you find out, oh, at best they have circumstantial evidence, wouldn't hold up in court for good fucking reason. Thank fucking God. And like you have to take in the sensory. Like it will make your intuition better. You'll actually start to figure out what the fuck is actually going on. But you have to take in sensory, and it's got to be credible fucking sensory at that. It can't be just like, because you find that like people will make videos and they're like, oh, what's the sensory here? And they'll throw in like a circumstantial evidence kind of sensory thing here or there, but they're actually building this fucking theory using other theories and abstractions that also don't have the fucking sensory. And that's how it all comes together. And it's just a lot of bullshit. Like, and I learned that long ago, and I was like, okay, yeah, I actually want to know what the truth is. So I'm going to look at both sides to my best of my ability. I'm going to approach it from every angle, and it has helped me a lot over the years. And that I found out is a big problem with my personality type, my personality preference. Like they all have that fucking issue. Like they all have that issue. There might be more balance now, but yeah. So in that sense, that was very interesting. And um, I'll turn it over to you guys.
Well, I think that's great. I mean, I know in my own life, I use it a lot in my relationship as well. And it really does help to know that, this other person you're in a relationship, the way they're acting the way they are isn't because they're trying to like do something against you or hurt you. It really removes the whole like the personal. It's like this isn't personal.
Don't take
This
it
is just
personally.
my
Yeah.
preference and I'm acting out of my preferences. And now that I see that, I can kind of back up and just look at the behavior in a different way and take myself out of the equation as a victim,
Indeed.
Great job, by the way, Joe. Thank you so much. I think, was there anything else you wanted to talk about? Because I think that, we could start wrapping it up. And I think if people have questions and stuff like that, we might see them in the chat, or please comment, by the way, if you're listening during the premiere or whenever you are. Leave some comments for the next time Joe comes on so we can maybe either explain things and we are going to go deeper. Sharon already has some notes and stuff. So,
yeah, we've already kind of planned this out. We're going to do multiple shows. So, what I asked from the audience, or you two for that matter, over the next days or whatever weeks before the next show, anything you don't understand, anything that was complicated, anything that needs clarification, and that includes, like I said, the audience, comment, send messages to Sharon and Brandon. We want to clarify this. I personally want to be able to give you the information in my head and have you understand it. So if there's something I said today that you don't understand, something you want to expand it upon, please comment or message, and next show we'll tackle it. So
awesome.
Absolutely. We hope to tackle the topic of like the typing process. So just as I'll just share this one last time, I'll just share this typing grid, and Joe will probably discuss a little bit about people's interaction styles and how that can get us into this part of the grid and be able to narrow people down by other things like their temperaments and these, I forgot what these things are called right here. Are these temperaments? I don't know what these are called.
Oh yeah, that's your temperament, and those are the metrics, the 3 metrics they identified for each temperament that would you can look for in the language. Blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, thank you. The metrics. So, yeah, we hope to talk a little bit more about that and some examples of how you can identify if someone is either direct or if they're initiating or if they're informative, etc. And we can talk about those things on the next.
I'm very informative. I'll just let everybody know. There's informative, and what's the other one? Direct.
Direct.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the best way I heard it put, well, we can leave people, I guess, with this, but unless there's anything else you want to talk about, but where if you open the refrigerator, like say you were a kid or whatever, and you open the fridge and there's no milk, what do? Do you say, we're out of milk, we don't have any milk? Or do you say, Mom, you need to go get milk? Or, Dad or Joe, or do you tell somebody they need to go get milk? So when I open the fridge and I'm saying there's no milk, I'm just being informative, right? I'm informing people of the situation because I don't like to tell people what to do. It's not what I prefer. But a direct person likes to tell people what to do. It's what they prefer. And so they'll say, hey, we don't have any milk. Go get milk. You need to get milk. But
I was
that's just
I was
tough.
told I was bossy when I used to work in corporate America. So, I mean, I
Just
would
means you're
just tell
direct.
people what needed to be done. Just be like,
Yeah, yeah.
hey, you go do that, you go do that.
God bless you. We need people like you, Sharon, because people like me, we're just like, this sucks. No. I'm just being informative. This sucks. And Sharon will be like, well, did you do this? You got to do this. And I'm like, oh, okay.
Go get milk, Brandon.
Exactly. There we go. I'll be back, guys. I'm going to get milk. Yeah. Anything else you want to say, Joe, before we wrap this up?
No, I mean, like I said earlier, just bring it up. We'll clarify it. We already kind of have a bit of an outline for the next show, but we can adjust it. So let us know.
Awesome. Well, thank you again, Joe. And I'm going to say this to the future Joe who's watching this along with us. You did a great job. Don't be so hard on yourself and don't overthink things that you think you messed up. It doesn't matter. We love you. It's over, Sharon. So when you're going back and watching this, you get to hear me say that again.
Yay.
If anyone has a
Sounds
problem with it,
good.
I'll be like, why don't you have your own show? Go start your own show. Not you. I mean, the person who has a problem with it, they could start their own show and then yeah,
They
but
could also look into these things like we do. They could go look for channels that talk about MBTI.
yeah,
And we could
100%.
actually recommend some of the ones we like. So,
Yeah, maybe
Joe,
we
if
could.
there's a couple that you can think of off the top of your head, you can share them now.
Yeah, okay. Well, the first, learning about the cognitive functions, you can always do that. The cognitive attitudes. We didn't really get into that today. We did a little bit when we were talking about the trickster and blah blah blah. But maybe we could say that for next time.
Okay.
So yeah, there's a channel called Ego Hackers. It's an offshoot channel of C.S. Joseph or Chase. But he let his team have like their own channel, and they put together these short videos on the cognitive functions or on the types themselves. And the ones on personally, I think the ones on the types themselves are some of the best videos on the fucking internet now. It's like 10-minute fucking videos explaining what an ENTJ is or an INTJ or whatever. I'd recommend that. Yes, you need to know your type. Unfortunately, it's hit and miss with the test, but over time you will find your type,
You
and
know,
we'll even help you. So
I would say if you do take a test or you take or look, I think CS Joseph has one that's pretty easy. Because
yeah,
some of these tests could be like 100 questions. Like they're insane. Like, and it's like, all right, I already know I'm an INTP. But what I would say is, take a test, try to figure out what you are. When you get close, just watch some of those videos, and if it resonates with you, that's what I did because I wasn't quite sure I got INTP, and then I watched the video and I was like, wow, this guy knows my soul. So I would say definitely do that. Watch the videos, find out what type you are, and then like we were saying in the beginning, just see what you can do to improve yourself. What can you work on? All that stuff, and that's really the best place to start that I could say. And then from there, you can learn about other people. And maybe make your relationship better. You never know. I'm sure stuff like this could save relationships and marriages because there's so many people that are together that they do love each other, but they have an issue with their communication. And I see it all the time. Maybe it's an INTP and I see the patterns, but when I'm with groups of people, I'm constantly saying, no, wait, that's not what that person meant. This is what they meant. And I had to like I was out to eat with Elizabeth the other day with her father and our father's wife, and we were just talking about something. I don't even remember what it was, but her and her father were not that they were arguing, but they were just having this miscommunication kind of thing. They didn't understand. I was like, wait a minute. I'm like, this is what she means. That's what. And they're
Let
like,
me
oh,
translate.
yeah.
yeah.
I've done that.
But
Yeah.
I feel like it's been like that my whole life. But enough about me. To the viewer, dear viewer, when you get this information, it really will help you in all your relationships. I think, because that little miscommunication, that's what adds up, because it's these little things all throughout the day that happen that the other person does that can piss you off, and they just build up, build up, build up, and then boom, you blow up, right? You explode. We've talked about this before. It's been called like nice guy syndrome or whatever. So you just add it up, and then boom, you explode. So now when these little things happen, you realize what they are, and you can let them go a lot easier. This is like what the process of letting go is. Sometimes you could just let go of things, but sometimes, I mean, people like me who are intellectual, we have to know why we're letting go. Like we want to know all the reasons. Then we're like, oh, okay, it makes sense. So, if nothing else, I'd say that's a reason to look into this stuff.
And I will state that since I've taken the very first C.S. Joseph, well, I wouldn't even say, but one of the first tests that C.S. Joseph had out years ago, maybe 2021, probably when I took it, is not the same as the one he has today. And I will say I retook it today and it was wrong. The first time I took it, it was spot on. This time it's giving me my subconscious or something.
Yeah.
Like giving
in
me
your case, the subconscious. Yeah.
Yeah, it's giving me my subconscious. Because of the way the questions, the way they're phrased, that's just odd. The way he had it before, when he had like a grid and then he would ask you what you relate with most, and you had like I feel like he had this big picture thing there. I don't even remember what it looked like, but I remember it was like 4 questions or something like that. And it was very simple. And I was like, yep, I'm more like this, and I'm more like that, and I'm more like that, and I'm more like that. Boom, my answer.
Yeah, what happened to that test?
He moved. He
Changed
changed
it.
it to something else. It's called UJA, UDJA. I don't understand it. It's crazy. I don't
Yeah,
get
it's
it.
even
And
changed again since the last time you took it, Brandon. When you took it in the group like a month ago, it's changed again. Like,
yeah,
Oh,
it's even changed even more.
bring back the old test, C.S. Joseph. We know
Yes.
you're watching.
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
would
So I
shout
don't
out to him
know.
though. Honestly, I have to give a big
Yeah,
shout out
no.
to
All
Joseph
good.
because
It's fine.
yeah, he's helped me a lot. Again, we don't agree with everything everybody says. Well, we always have to say this. I don't even know what I wouldn't agree with, but I'm just saying. But all the stuff that I've seen from him and learned, great, good stuff. So
Yeah, like lately he's on to more different things. He's kind of developed something else, and I don't know where he's going with it, so I can't really comment. But one thing is for sure though, if you if you go to the place where you take his test, csjoseph.life, and then you click the test, there is a part of the test in there that will say download the companion guide. If you download that file and you go through it yourself, and you don't have to take the test, just do that and read through the things, it might be easier for you to say, oh, I'm more like this versus this. And that might help you narrow down better than the actual test. So that's what I will say.
that's right. All right.
So
Well, hey, we've come to the end of this episode, everybody. Thank you guys so much. Big shout out to the chat. Remember, every Thursday we premiere these or we are live. So join us in the live chat because we'll be in there one way or another and hang out with us. Make sure you comment, subscribe, like. If you'd like more of Oversharing, go to morelawsmoreproblems.com. It's the website. Click on the Oversharing tab. There's several ways to support us financially. And like we always say, the best way to support us is just to show up here, like our stuff, comment. And like Joe said, if there's anything you didn't understand in this episode or you want clarification, please let us know. And we will include it in upcoming episodes on the Myers-Briggs. Yeah. So what do we say to the good people, Sharon?
that once you start oversharing,
Then you totally stop being a Karen.
that's right.
And remember, everybody, we're not telling you how to live.
Just how to live a little bit more. I think I used this before, but we'll just say it again, mindfully.
There you
Did I
go.
say that one yet?
Mindfully. All right, everybody.
I
We'll
don't
see
know.
you next week. Thanks again, Joe. Thank you guys so much. Take care. Have a good one.